The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, depending on where you're calling from today. Before we dive into that, I'll give you a little bit of background information about today's webinar, or logistical information. We are recording today's session, and we'll be recording this or sharing this recording with you via email. Probably either tomorrow or Monday, you'll receive an email with a link to our website where you can access this information. So if you ever need to refer to it in the future, if you'd like to share that link with other colleagues, feel free to do so. We're happy to share this information with anyone you'd like to. So anyone that might miss this presentation, you're more than welcome to share that. We're also encouraging any kind of questions you have by submitting those via the GoToWebinar control panel at the bottom of your screen, or the right-hand side of your screen at the bottom. You should see a GoToWebinar control panel. If you just go to the questions tab, you can submit questions there, and it's only me that'll see it. The rest of the audience won't see those questions. And you can send those questions at any time. I'll get to the queue of questions at the end. We'll leave about 10 to 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end of today's session. And then also, if you are social media savvy, if you're on Twitter and you'd like to tweet some of the interesting points you might find in this event, feel free to do so. You can use or reference Panorama ERP, which is our corporate marketing Twitter handle. We'll be tweeting throughout the event as well. You can also use the hashtag digital transformation for Twitter or other social media if you'd like. One other logistical thing too that's not on the slide, we are going to be submitting a series of polls throughout today's session, and it's not something we normally do. So we're testing that out today, so bear with me or bear with us as we're trying that out. But you should see a series of poll questions peppered throughout the session just to get a feel for some of your feedback and some of your input on that. So the agenda for today is, first of all, we'll talk about a little bit about Panorama Consulting Solutions. I know I've given a brief introduction for myself, but we'll talk about Panorama and what we do. We'll talk about the purpose of today's webinar, and then we'll dive into the difference between digital transformation and ERP implementations. I know a lot of people on the phone or maybe thinking about enterprise technology or ERP systems and wondering how is that different from the big buzzword of the day, transformation, and that's what we'll kind of set the context for with starting off the meat of the presentation. And then we'll dive into how to define your digital transformation strategy and also talk about how to leverage technology to transform your organization. And then we'll leave it open for questions and answers, like I said, with 10 or 15 minutes or so at the end of today's session. So before we get started on the heart of the presentation, just a bit about Panorama. We are an independent ERP consulting firm. In fact, we're the world's largest and the world's leading independent ERP and enterprise software consulting firm. Some of the key service offerings that we provide are everything from enterprise system strategy to ERP evaluation selection, implementation project management, post-implementation benefits realization. We do quite a bit in the way of project recovery as well. A lot of clients will hire us when they've tried to implement technology on their own and failed or had some difficulties with other consultants, and they'll hire us to come in and clean up those projects and take over the implementations. We also do quite a bit in the way of organizational change management and business process reengineering, which is a critical part of our implementation methodology, but some clients also hire us for those services as standalone offerings as well. And then I mentioned before that we also do expert witness work as well, which is something that myself and a team of expert witnesses also provide to our attorney clients as well. And then some of the industries we work in, primarily manufacturing and distribution historically. I'd say roughly 70 to 80% of our revenue over the years has come from the manufacturing and distribution space, which is pretty broad. That includes everything from auto parts manufacturing to industrial products, consumer goods, food and beverage, aerospace and defense, a number of different micro verticals, but just the broad category of manufacturing and distribution has been our sweet spot over the years. But in recent years, in the last 5 years or so, we've diversified into a number of other verticals as well, including professional services, government, energy, healthcare, and a number of others. Our team of consultants is global, so we have consultants all over the world. We're based in Denver, so that's where I am today and where our headquarters is. But our consultants are throughout the world, and most of them have an average of 20 plus years of either industry experience, consulting experience, or vendor experience as well. And then we also tend to hire people that are more business-centric than technology necessarily. So we like people that have Six Sigmas, MBAs, PMPs, AFIC certification, etc. They certainly have the technological skill sets that are needed to make a project successful, but that business finesse or that business competency we find is more valuable and more important to the success of a project. So that's an important part of the types of people that we hire and develop within Panorama. And speaking of development, we also ensure that all of our consultants are trained in our 360-degree ERP certification program, which is a training program that we put all of our consultants through to make sure that they have the same methodology and tool set and best practices that we've developed over the years, and that working with different Panorama team members delivers the same type of processes and results. And then, as I mentioned before, we have offices throughout the world. We're based in Denver, but we have offices in Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, New York, Houston in the U.S., as well as Dubai and Lima outside of the U.S. And our clients span all over the world, including those cities and those regions and other parts of the world where we don't have offices, but our consultants go to wherever our clients are. And we also have broad and deep enterprise software technology. These are just a few of the 200+ different enterprise software systems that we've helped our clients select and implement over the years. There's a lot more that's not listed here that certainly are relevant as well, but hopefully this gives you a sense of our breadth and depth as a company. And again, the fact that we are independent and that we're not aligned with any one software solution or software solutions hopefully conveys that we are completely independent and technology agnostic. And the only thing we really care about in terms of technology is finding the technology that's best for our clients, not necessarily what most consultants look for, which is how can we position the software that we are reselling or that we're somehow partnering or aligned with. So that's a bit about Panorama Consulting. The purpose of today's webinar is, first of all, to understand the difference between an ERP implementation and a broader digital transformation. And again, the word digital transformation is something that fascinates me because it's such a big buzzword right now. And quite frankly, when I first heard it, I thought it sounded a little bit outdated, even though it's a current term. Just the word digital to me sounds like something you'd hear in the 80s, partly because there was a big computer company called Digital, but also because digital was such a big deal when digital watches and things like that came out. So it's interesting to me to hear that digital transformation is such a big buzzword right now. So we'll talk about the difference between the two, and then we'll talk about how to understand how to define the technology strategy that's best for your organization, and then we'll also talk about how to learn how to define and manage an effective digital transformation strategy. So it appears you've already got a poll in front of you, and I apologize, I can't tell if it's blocking the screen or not, or if you're able to see my content here. But we did submit a poll here, and I'm going to see if I can show you the results. I'm not sure if you can see them or not, and I apologize. Again, this is my first time doing the polls here in the webinars. But we have a poll here, and the question is, what is your ERP implementation pet peeve? And the three possible responses are automation of the status quo, resistance to change, or inflexible technology. So just looking at the results here, looks like 52% said resistance to change is a big pet peeve, followed by automation of the status quo at 29%, and then inflexible technology is 19%. So that's interesting, especially because those first two responses, resistance to change and automation of the status quo, that's very relevant to digital transformation because you're talking about kind of quantum leaps in technology that involve a lot of change. That resistance to change certainly becomes even more relevant in digital transformations. And then also automation of the status quo. Most people that are going down the path of some sort of digital transformation are hoping to shake up the status quo and improve the status quo and making sure that they can automate that. So interesting results for sure. And thank you for the responses there too, by the way. And thank you for your patience while I try to figure out this whole poll thing. All right, so moving on to the next section here. We're going to talk a little bit about ERP implementations versus digital transformations and talk a little bit about how they're different from one another. And just to summarize, the way I always characterize the two or separate or differentiate the two being ERP implementation versus digital transformation. So digital transformation is generally more of a disruptive technology. And I don't mean disruptive in a bad way as far as it's going to disrupt or screw up your organization. I mean disruptive in terms of it's completely changing your business model and completely changing the way you operate. ERP implementations generally are certainly meant to improve businesses and provide business benefits, but generally speaking, and this is a broad generalization, but generally speaking, ERP implementations, when you're talking about implementing a single ERP system, they've historically been something that's automating the status quo, or at best providing kind of an incremental improvement to the business. And again, that's not a bad thing, because a lot of us, or a lot of organizations here on the phone, you're probably operating with a legacy system that might be 10 or 20 years old or more. And so just simply automating what you've got now could give you quite a bit of benefit, just because your system's so old and you're probably so inefficient in some of those operations. So not a bad thing. I don't want to, in the intent of this webinar, by the way, isn't to suggest that digital transformation is for everyone or that it's better than ERP implementations, but it's just to kind of call out how they are different. And so that's one of the main differences is digital transformation is more of a disruptive technology initiative that's really challenging the overall business model, the overall operational model, and trying to find creative ways to use technology to make the business better. It's also focused on business process reengineering instead of incremental improvements. Again, a lot of ERP implementations that clients hire us for are more focused on let's take those little baby steps to make our business better, versus let's take that big quantum leap and completely transform our business, which is the intent generally of digital transformation. The third point is that employee acceptance of new technology instead of transactional training becomes very important with digital transformation. So here's where organizational change becomes critical, even more critical than ERP implementations. And by the way, even with those incremental improvements that you typically see in ERP implementations, organizational change is very difficult, and I think a lot of you on the phone agree with that, because 52% of you said that resistance to change was a pet peeve of yours. So if you have that pet peeve with an ERP implementation, you can only imagine how much of a pet peeve it'll be with the digital transformation, where you're talking about even more major change for employees. And then finally, the last point, and this is a big one, is that digital transformation typically entails implementing whatever technology fits and is going to help transform your business, instead of focusing on or being cornered into one software solution. And I think that's one of the downfalls of ERP systems and ERP vendors in general, is that a lot of times they'll try to force fit their entire solution into your business. And the reality is it may not be the right fit. It may be that their system is a good back office system to manage your financials and your inventory, but you need some other types of systems to help you with things like CRM or document management or business intelligence. Some of those types of functionalities that ERP systems traditionally aren't as good at as other standalone systems. So it really also starts to beg the question of kind of single ERP versus best of breed. Again, looking at the best technology that's out there, whether it's one system for your entire business or 12 different systems for your entire business. And it used to be that having multiple systems was a bad thing, and that means you had disparate systems, disparate data. And that still is somewhat of a challenge, but with technology and integration the way it is today and the advancements that have come along, that's not as big of a deal or as big of a detriment as it used to be in years past. So when you look at digital transformation, it is a big adjustment. When you look at enterprise technology initiatives in general, according to our research, and this is based on our 2016 enterprise software and ERP report that came out earlier this year, and this is looking at 200 plus different organizations that had recently gone through a technological transformation. You could see that 34% said that the process and organizational changes were difficult, and another 6% said it was very difficult. So you had 40% that said it was that there was a difficult challenge for them, and then you had 24% that said it was neutral, and then you had a minority that said it was either easy or very easy. And quite frankly, that surprises me that even 36% would say it was easy or very easy, because I don't know that I've ever met a client or a person or even a consultant that said that the technological, the process and organizational aspects of a project were easy. But that's what the survey says, and that's what the data shows in our global research, is that a majority find it to be difficult, and only a small fraction or a minority of project teams find transformations like these to be easy. And now when we look at ERP implementations, and getting back to the point of ERP implementations generally being more of an incremental improvement versus a quantum leap or a major transformation, you can see that the reasons, or the top reasons why organizations embark on their ERP implementations, and the number one reason is because they want to replace their legacy system. And that's kind of a challenge that we see with a lot of clients that hire us as well, as they say, hey, look, we've got this system that we've had for 20 years. It's an old green screen, mainframe, homegrown type of thing, or overly customized AS400 version of an enterprise system. And in order for us to move forward as a company, we have to find a new platform. And that's a valid reason, but generally that type of mentality or that type of focus on just replacing your old system is going to lead you to pave the cow paths to a certain extent, and so to speak. And so in other words, it's going to lead you to want to automate your existing business processes and just do the same thing you've been doing, but with better technology. And again, I'm not knocking that approach. That alone, for a lot of companies, can deliver huge benefits, and that can deliver a massive ROI, and it typically does deliver a pretty good ROI for most companies that implement well. But it's typically not enough to truly transform your business and get you to the next level, particularly if you're going through some pretty massive changes, or you have pretty ambitious growth goals, or if you're going through a lot of acquisition or trying to integrate the company across the globe. You're going to need something potentially more than just an incremental ERP implementation. So that's the number one response, is replacing that legacy system. But you can see that there's other reasons too: positioning the company for growth, improving business performance, compliance reasons, things like that. So there's a lot of reasons why companies are going through their ERP implementations. But if you look at this list, you can see that these are valid and good business benefits that can deliver an ROI to a lot of companies, but they don't point to a massive or a major transformation that a lot of companies are looking for from their technologies. So when we look at the reasons for the digital transformations and why companies go through them, one would be to change your company's business model. That's a common reason why companies go through transformations. And when we say, changing the company's business model, we might be talking about anything from e-commerce, for example, and allowing employees to interact and engage with you. Allowing customers to interact and engage with you electronically over the internet versus having to call or email or fax orders to you. Not to say you're going to get rid of those personal touch points, but a lot of companies are moving that direction. For example, working with a company that provides auto parts. It's one of a few companies we're working with now that provides auto parts, and they're really struggling with how do we use technology to just completely transform the customer experience to where they're buying from us electronically online versus the old school way of sending in emails or calling a sales rep. And so that's part of what our directive is as part of our evaluation and implementation, is how can we use technology to completely change the business model, not just automate the way they process orders or the way they track inventory or the way they run their financials. That's all good, but they're looking for something more than that. They're looking for us to help completely change the business model, completely change the customer experience, and that's a completely different mindset than just going into your kind of vanilla, historic, traditional ERP selection and implementation. The second reason for digital transformation is to enable process reengineering, and we have a whole separate webinar series and a whole service offering devoted just to business process reengineering, so I could easily spend the whole hour talking about that one topic, but I won't. But I invite you to, if you'd like, you can always find that on demand on our YouTube page or on our website. You can find some of the webinars, on-demand webinars we've done for process reengineering. But the whole point there is, again, we're focused on how can we make completely optimize and improve our business processes rather than making those incremental improvements that just simply automate or provide a new tool for doing the same things. So it's really a matter of kind of challenging what is it that we need to do, how can we do this better, and what are the ways that we can leverage technology to make us completely re-engineer our business processes. And as a side note to that as well, if you are going to focus on digital transformation and the business process re-engineering that goes along with it, you have to kind of change your mindset on what a implementation plan typically looks like. Typically, the process and requirements definition phase wouldn't be super extensive in terms of taking months or extensive amount of time. But when you're talking digital transformation and you're going into a project knowing that that's what you want to do, you have to kind of challenge the status quo or the common way of ERP vendors wanting to do implementations, and really take your time up front to re-engineer and design those business processes first then define as you're going which technologies can best enable that, and then the technology rather than just going out and finding the software via high-level requirements gathering and then defining the processes later. You want to do more of that business process reengineering up front. Otherwise, you're highly likely to just simply automate what you've already been doing. So enabling process reengineering is an important one, and then also materially changing products and how they're delivered. I gave you the example of the auto parts supplier that was looking for a way to transform the customer experience. In their case, they weren't really changing their product itself, but they were changing the way they were providing that experience to the customer. But there are cases, especially in the services industry or technology industry, where technology can affect the way you change your product or in the way you manage your products and how you deliver them to customers. Certainly, even manufacturers that we work with can affect the way they change and manage their products through product lifecycle management and other technologies that may or may not be part of your core ERP system. And then finally, another reason for digital transformation is to leverage the flexibility and integration of modern technologies. So again, it's a matter of not necessarily thinking, hey, I'm a big company, I'm a big global, Fortune 1000 company or multi-billion-dollar company, whatever it is. So I have two options. I have either SAP or Oracle. And that's kind of, when I started my career, that was how the landscape was. When you're a big Fortune 1000 company, you had SAP or Oracle, and over the years, maybe you start to consider Microsoft Dynamics. 10 years ago, Dynamics started to become a viable option. In more recent years, you have Infor and some of the others that are kind of considered tier 1 or upper tier 2. But still, even now, with more options in the ERP space, you don't have to choose just one ERP system. And choosing multiple systems isn't a negative thing like it used to be. There's certainly pros and cons and trade-offs for either option or scenario, but you definitely have a lot more options now in terms of how you can integrate different systems and how you can use technology to be flexible. And just quite candidly, traditional single ERP systems aren't the most flexible. Flexibility isn't generally a strength of single ERP systems, but best of breed generally gives you a little bit more flexibility. So when you're looking at digital transformation, you're generally you may still want to look at, in a best case scenario, having one ERP system, but you're more likely going to end up with maybe a core ERP system and then a series of systems that tie into that core ERP system. Now, when we look at benefits realized from ERP implementations, you can see the different types of benefits that were realized from these implementations. You can see that availability of information was the #1 benefit that organizations see or saw from their implementations last year, and also improved data reliability, improved productivity and efficiency. So just look at those top 3. Those are good, tangible benefits, or maybe not quite. The availability of information is hard to quantify, but certainly in terms of improved productivity and efficiency, you've got some tangible benefits there. So you have tangible and intangible benefits that are being delivered from ERP implementations. But again, you look at those top 3, and those aren't necessarily those major transformative types of benefits that you might expect to see from a digital transformation. And so when you're looking at digital transformations, the top responses are probably going to look more like top-line revenue growth, because now we can truly transform our products and or the way we're delivering our products or service to our customers. You probably start to see more things like increased flexibility. So we've got more flexibility to enter new markets and to provide better innovation with our employees, so they're developing better products, and so we're, again, increasing top-line revenue growth via that route as well. So, this is interesting info, and again, it delivers an ROI to many companies out there. The average payback period for an ERP implementation is just under 3 years. I think it's 2.7 years on average, and that's been pretty steady over the years that we've been studying ERP implementations. But digital transformations aren't satisfied with that. They're looking for that next, kind of taking it to the next level. And so that's a big difference in terms of the types of benefits you expect to see from ERP and digital transformations. Last thing I'll say about this too is when you talk about benefits, I think there's a certain subset, and you can certainly see that there are some companies here, I think 1%, that they had no benefits. But when you look at other slides we have or other data points, that a majority of ERP implementations fail to deliver a majority of the benefits that are expected. And a lot of companies are okay with that because, again, they're simply automating what they already had, and they have to get a new system, so they're not necessarily looking for a huge amount of benefit. But when you're talking about digital transformation, you generally are talking about trying to get a larger degree of business benefits, or you have higher expectations for your business benefits. So some of the benefits of digital transformations, or the potential benefits, if you do it right, I should say, of digital transformations would be an improved operational model. So again, it's not just looking at efficiencies, but now you're talking about how can we truly transform the way we operate the business, and really take 2 or 3 steps ahead rather than just one baby step ahead in improvement. You also have an enhanced competitive advantage. When you look at where your competitors are, how can we look at digital transformation as a way to make our companies materially better than our competition? In some cases and in some industries, if you're not going through a digital transformation, then you're already behind. Fortunately for a lot of manufacturers, they still have time to kind of catch up, or at least get ahead of their competitors when it comes to digital transformation. But when you look at services companies or technology-related companies, if you're not leveraging digital transformation, chances are you're pretty far behind. And even, like I said, in manufacturing and distribution, that's changing pretty quickly. A lot of companies are moving down this path of digital transformation and getting ahead of their competition. So, in a year or so, or 2 years, I might be saying something different, that now it's just a matter of trying to keep up rather than getting ahead necessarily. Digital transformation also allows better innovation and collaboration among employees. So better knowledge management, better product development, and ways to get the knowledge capital within the organization kind of consolidated and centralized to where you're fully leveraging that knowledge base and that knowledge capital that you have within the company. You also have fully re-engineered business processes in digital transformation. So again, we're focused on how can we really challenge ourselves and make these processes better, rather than just allowing organizational resistance to creep in, or excuses for not wanting to change our processes to creep in. And then how can we leverage technology to enable those re-engineered business processes? And that's an important point too, is that most digital transformations are driven by the process re-engineering rather than allowing the software to drive the process re-engineering. And so that's a key takeaway too, is that you have to decide, am I doing a digital transformation or an ERP implementation? If I'm doing a digital transformation, then I can't just assume that I'm going to go pick the software and that's going to drive my business process improvements, like the traditional old school way of managing process changes with ERP implementations. You have to instead say, if I'm doing a digital transformation, I want to first define what my processes are going to look like and how I'm going to change them and how I can make them better. Now I'm going to go out and find the technology that best enables me to do that. And again, that may be one ERP system, or it could be 5 or 10 different systems that you tie together using different technologies. You have more technological options, as I mentioned before, because you're not just limiting yourself to a single ERP system, which for a lot of companies, if you're just looking at ERP systems, you're quickly narrowing the field down to 3 or 5 or 7 solutions, and which is great. I mean, you have options there, but you're still fairly or relatively limited to what you can do if you were to look at a best-of-breed type of approach and look at what CRM systems are out there to help our salespeople really knock it out of the park and sell more, regardless of whether or not it's the same system that our financial and accounting people think is the best for managing and tracking our financial information. And speaking of financial information, better business intelligence is another benefit of digital transformation. Is now you can really look at, regardless of the reporting or business intelligence limitations of my ERP system, what technology can I use to give myself and the executive team more visibility into my operations and help me make decisions better and not be so reactive and be more proactive in planning and whatnot. So better business intelligence is a key one. And then you also find that with digital transformation, you generally have happier employees who embrace change. And this is especially true as you talk about millennials entering the workplace. And I know that's another big hot topic right now, is how to manage millennials and what millennials expect versus baby boomers and Generation X. But in general, you find that when you have more modern technologies, more flexible technology, you're going to have happier employees that are more comfortable with the technology, particularly as you have those millennials under 30 or whatever the age is, the top end for millennials, particularly as you have those millennials entering the workforce and expecting something to be as easy as Facebook or Snapchat or whatever they use in their personal lives, they have that same expectation for technology in the workplace as well, and that old green screen mainframe that you implemented 20 years ago isn't cutting it for the average millennial. In fact, it's interesting to see how foreign something like that is to someone that grew up using Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, and other social media. So that's a little bit about how the two compare, but how do you define your digital transformation strategy? That's the next big question. And I think we have another poll question here that just popped up, and I'll go through that real quick before we move on. But that is, does your current technology support your corporate strategy? And I'll give you a second to answer that question before I move on, because we are going to talk about how to align technology with corporate strategy here in just a second. And while we're waiting, it looks like about half of you voted. We'll give you a couple more minutes to submit your vote. The choices are either yes, your technology supports your corporate strategy, it does somewhat, or not at all. So I'll give you just a second here. It looks like most of you are submitting your responses now. Okay, so we'll close that up then, and it looks like the responses are 82% of you think that your technology somewhat supports your corporate strategy. 14% of you said yes, and then 5% of you said not at all. So I should at some point probably let those of you that said yes, maybe you guys should present this next section, because it's about how to get technology to align with your corporate strategy, and how do you define that digital transformation in a way that supports your corporate strategy. So a few steps to define your digital transformation strategy. The first is to clearly define or understand your corporate strategy. And CIOs, I think, in general, are getting better at understanding their corporate strategy and understanding their role and their contributions to that corporate strategy. But it's still a challenge. It's still a disconnect that we often see between IT departments and enterprise technology initiatives and the overall corporate strategy. And I gave you the example a few moments ago about the companies that want to make that big leap, or they want to really scale for heavy growth. They want to go from a $500 million company today to $2 billion in 3 years, whatever the numbers might be. And if that's your corporate strategy, that's going to give you a very different enterprise technology strategy than a $20 million company that's hoping to maybe get to $30 million in 5 years. So those are two very different strategies. Neither one's right or wrong, and our job with our clients is not to opine on or criticize or guide companies on how to define their corporate strategy, because we know our clients know their business better than anyone. They know their strategies better than anyone. But what we do help is help define and articulate what is that strategy, and how can we align the technology initiatives with that strategy. And that's the beauty of being independent, because we're going to come up with a different answer every time we deal with a client, because every client has a different strategy, different needs, different objectives. And we don't care what technology or technologies a client uses, as long as it aligns with that strategy. And that's what makes us unique in digital transformation, is we're not here to peddle SAP or Oracle or Microsoft or whatever the software is. We're not here to peddle anything. We're here just to make sure that our clients put together a digital transformation enterprise technology roadmap that best fits their long-term strategy. So that's the first step: define your corporate strategy. Second is to translate that corporate strategy into an operational business process strategy. Now, this is one of many on here that are a lot easier said than done, and I could spend an hour just talking about any one of these steps. So I'm going to intentionally gloss over it, or just give you a high-level flyover of what that means. But in general, I've got a slide, by the way, that'll show this in a little bit more visual detail here in a second. But in general, you want to define the operational business strategy and objectives that specifically tie to those different corporate strategy objectives. And we generally do that by helping our clients develop a strategy articulation map that starts with a corporate strategy and objectives, and then starts to cascade those objectives down to technological objectives that can give you clear direction on the roadmap for how technology will support your business. The third is to translate your business processes into organizational change strategies. So looking at those business processes that you are re-engineering and how you're going to re-engineer them, you're also looking at not just what technologies will help us enable those business process re-engineering areas, but also what organizational change strategies can help us realize those business process re-engineerings. And remember, 52% of you said that resistance to change or organizational resistance was your pet peeve with enterprise technology initiatives. So making sure that you have a change management strategy is even more critical for digital transformation, even more so than it is for ERP implementations. And the fourth step is define how technology can best support those first three steps, and that's where the whole technological evaluation process comes into play. And again, it may be that you're looking at single ERP systems, but if you're doing a true digital transformation, you're probably also looking at best-of-breed solutions. You're probably also looking at CRM options. You're looking at business intelligence. You're looking at product lifecycle management. You might be looking at document management. You might be looking at internal collaboration tools like Yammer and other things like that. So a lot of different technologies that may or may not reside in one single ERP system. So the evaluation process can be a bit more extensive than if you're just doing a more straightforward single ERP selection. But the upside, obviously, is that you're giving yourself more options. You're truly transforming your business and giving yourselves a chance to have a higher ROI than you might see from a traditional ERP implementation. Fifth step is to define strategic KPIs or key performance indicators, performance metrics, whatever you want to call them, and benefits realization plans to maximize that return on investment. So KPIs are really important for digital transformation, even more so than ERP implementations, because the risk and the level of change and the level of potential benefits and the potential cost and risk of a digital transformation is generally quite a bit higher than a more ERP implementation. So, I guess the good news for the more vanilla ERP implementations is that even though they are risky and costly and challenging, that's even more so for digital transformation. So you're definitely upping the ante, so to speak, with digital transformation. So you want to have KPIs that closely measure not only how much time, money, and resources are involved in implementing the solution, but just as importantly, if not more importantly, how am I going to get the benefits and ROI out of that investment. So here's the strategy articulation map I mentioned before. This is an example, or a redacted example from a recent client, and you can see that at the top you can see that there are some corporate objectives. I think there's 7 corporate objectives at the top that talk about what they want to accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years, and it's focused on product development, expansion into commercial markets, anticipating economic fluctuations, etc. You kind of see what those different objectives are, and there's a lot of detail behind those objectives. It's obviously more complex than just what can fit into a PowerPoint box, but it's a way to summarize the detail behind those objectives. And then when you look down below, you see a number of IT strategies, IT initiatives, and then key performance indicators that follow each of those strategic tracks, if you will. So you kind of follow each of those objectives at the top, across from left to right. You follow each of those from top to bottom to kind of work your way down to what are my specific IT initiatives that are going to enable that objective that you see at the top. So generally, this process that you see here is one of the first steps we go to because we need to define that strategy, and we need to define the details and objectives in terms of how we're going to achieve those corporate objectives. And what this document does, it then gives us a kind of a starting point for a roadmap for how now can we go out and start to evaluate specific technologies. How can we start to re-engineer business processes in the context of this articulation roadmap, and how can we set up KPIs and whatnot as well, and how can we define our organizational change strategies too. So this is a first step in defining a more robust or more detailed digital transformation strategy and roadmap. This is one of the foundational tools that we use with our clients to define that. And then shifting gears a little bit, or kind of building this out a little bit more. Actually, before I move on to the next section, there's another poll question. I think this is our last one. Which are you pursuing or planning to, or which are you pursuing or planning to pursue? Is it either an ERP implementation, digital transformation, or neither? I'll give you a second to respond here before we move on. Okay. Well, it looks like most of you voted, not everyone voted, but you had an interesting split here between digital transformation and neither. 40% of you said digital transformation, 40% said neither, 20% said ERP implementation. So I'd be curious to know if there was a response here for other, maybe there's something else that is being pursued. Maybe it's best of breed, or maybe it's just a CRM implementation, or other types of systems. I'm not sure, but that's very interesting responses, especially because we haven't done that poll before. So interesting to see. So now let's talk a little bit about how to leverage technology to transform your organization. So your technology should support your corporate, operational, and organizational strategies. And here's a kind of a visual of what I talked about before about how ERP can generally be the core back end of your system with financials, inventory management, warehouse management, etc. But then you've got a number of, I hate to use the word bolt-on because that always has such a negative connotation, but you have a series of other systems or point solutions that tie back to that ERP system and give you more enhanced functionality and integration back to that ERP system that hopefully or ideally will give you the business benefits that you're looking for. And that can be everything from e-commerce, business intelligence, point of sale for retail organizations, HCM, CRM, Internet of Things is another big buzzword. So there's a lot of different types of technologies that can be used here, but those are just a visual of how generally you would define what your strategy is, what technologies you're going to look at, and then go through the evaluation and implementation process based on that strategy after you've defined a more detailed strategy of how you plan to leverage these technologies and the associated business process improvements. So when we look at deployment options, and we won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but the whole cloud versus on-premise versus SaaS discussion is obviously another hot topic. But you can see that when we look at companies that have just recently implemented enterprise technology, 56% of them are going with, let me make sure I'm reading this right. I'm having trouble reading the slide. I believe it's 56% are cloud solution. No, that's not right. 56% are on-premise still, because it is still a slight majority of implementations that are on-premise, and then the remainder are split between cloud and SaaS. So when you look at cloud and SaaS, they haven't quite reached the tipping point of being a majority of implementations, but that area is definitely growing pretty quickly, especially the cloud ERP segment, which is that 27% that you see there. That's the cloud solutions that are the deployment options there. That's where we're seeing most of the growth with our clients, as well as in the data that we put out each year with companies across the globe. So just to kind of wrap it up here, to transform your organization, a few takeaways or summary types of steps. First of all, determine if you're ready for digital transformation instead of a relatively simple ERP implementation. And in the case of the 40% of you that said you're not going to do either, hopefully some of these takeaways still apply. And a lot of what we talked about here today applies to any type of business or technology transformation that you're going through. Secondly, you want to define your digital transformation strategy, assuming that is the direction you go down. And if it's not, you want to define your ERP strategy, which is another viable strategy for a lot of companies. You want to evaluate your software and technology options and keep your options open and keep that flexibility. Determine how technology will disrupt your business and facilitate process reengineering. And then also determine how you'll manage organizational and cultural change to enable that transformation. And then moving on to the next slide, the sixth step is to develop an effective implementation plan. And notice that it's taken us a while or a few steps to get to that implementation plan because there's so much legwork that needs to be done up front before you even start to evaluate specific technologies or select a specific technology. And then you also, on the seventh point, want to manage the technology, people, and process implementation. So you're managing the overall transformation, not just on the technology side, but even more importantly on the people and process side of things. So those are kind of the three major work streams you want to make sure you invest equal time and effort into. The eighth step would be to integrate silos and technologies, because that is a risk of digital transformation. Now you're talking about, typically, more commonly than not, more best-of-breed solutions. So how can we integrate the silos and the technologies to ensure that we aren't running into disparate or fragmented technologies or data? And then a ninth step is to continuously improve via a digital transformation center of excellence. So how can we build our internal technical, functional, and organizational competencies to ensure that we have a internal knowledge base and internal focus on continuously improving that digital transformation? And that's another topic we could spend a whole hour on, but that is an important step in the digital transformation process. And then finally, enlist the help of independent software consultants. And we'd say that even if you're going through an ERP initiative, because there are so many options just in the ERP technology space, but especially even more so when you're going through a digital transformation, because when you're looking at best of breed, you're not looking at one vendor. You're looking at, many times you're considering a dozen or 2 dozen or more different solutions in the different point areas that you're looking for technology. So having that independent, unbiased view, that technology agnostic view that's solely focused on finding the right technology for you is critically important for digital transformations as